Today on the podcast, we're airing my conversation with Bryce Fluellen, who sadly recently passed away. We've decided to air this episode, which was recorded in November, as our way of celebrating his life, the incredible work that he has done, and to contribute to the honoring of his legacy by sharing his wisdom. Bryce has fought for food justice and social equity for more than 20 years, developing and implementing strategic programs at Starbucks, Magic Johnson Enterprises, and the American Heart Association to drive systemic change to benefit underserved populations and communities. As Community Impact Director at the Los Angeles chapter of the American Heart Association, he was instrumental in developing and executing a multi-year, multi-million-dollar regional campaign with the National Football League Foundation to transform and improve youth physical activity, building a collective impact blueprint for the league that scaled across 30 team markets. Bryce also aligned with the American Heart Association's national office to develop national health equity programs, cultivating volunteers, donors, and corporations for both national and local initiatives. He created a groundbreaking, sustainable basic cooking skills and nutrition curriculum for more than 9,000 children within the LA, Long Beach, and Santa Ana school districts, and facilitated hundreds of workshops to educate parents, school administrators, corporate and community leaders about the positive impact of healthy eating on disease prevention. He was a classically trained chef. He operated a Los Angeles full-service catering company called Yams Catering, where he created partnerships with health-focused organizations to educate Black and Brown communities about healthy eating. In 2022, Bryce was named one of the 50 most influential restaurant leaders by the NRN Power List and was a featured subject matter expert at the Culinary Institute of America and Harvard University's T.H. Chan Public School of Health Menus of Change Summit, Fast Casual Magazine's Franchise Innovation Conference, and W.K. Kellogg Foundation's Radical Social Enterprise convening. He also served on the executive committee of the Los Angeles Food Policy Council, and in 2016, he published his first book that artfully connects healthy recipes with captivating family stories, titled Food, a Vehicle for Healing.
Typically, we like to keep our episodes around 45 minutes, and then we'll create bonus clips from the unaired pieces. But in order to ensure that we are truly honoring Bryce's life and legacy, we've decided to air this episode in its entirety. And we're going to do that without any community ads. So you're going to hear all that Bryce had to share. We are also actively looking for other ways that we and you, the audience, can honor Bryce's legacy. And once we identify how we can do that, we're going to bring you those details as well.
Without further ado, we're pleased to introduce you to Bryce Fluellen. Bryce, welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be here. Excited to have the conversation.
I'm so excited to talk with you too. There's so much I want to cover, and I feel like this is going to be an episode where I learn a lot. There's the things that I don't know either anything or much about that I'm so eager to talk with you about. But I kind of want to tee up the meaty part of the conversation by just kind of talking a little bit about your background, how you got into or interested in food, and then how that became part of your work. Because I don't think you were working in food from the get-go. It isn't based on your resume that I saw.
No, I wasn't. But I started off growing up as like, it was deemed a professional eater.
Okay.
So yes, I was really good at eating food. I had an aunt who is about Aunt Bessie and my uncle and C, who I stayed with. They were like second parents. I stayed with them from about 9 to 11. And my aunt was the cook in the family. My mother is the youngest of 10. So my Aunt Bessie was 20 years older than my mother. But she was the one who had a garden in the backyard. She was the one who would take me to farmers markets. And her and my uncle and C would have conversations about the cucumbers don't taste as good as they did last season. So that was my intro into really fresh food. Like I used to tell her before she passed, I was like, you used to make peaches. I thought you put sugar on the peaches. And she was like, no, I just knew how to pick them. Like I knew how to pick them at their height. So that was my first intro and falling in love with food and just eating it. Never imagined that, I would have a career a couple decades in at this point. And then I started waiting tables in college. So I think that was where I got bit with the bug. It was a Black-owned restaurant. Her name was Miss Shirley Kavanaugh in Washington, D.C., and she owned a jazz restaurant called Trumpets. It's a beautiful space. Like you had to go underground. And once you open the doors, ceilings were low, black tables, dim lit lights. We would have everybody from like Miles Davis to Betty Carter. So you're learning about music. But for me, I was just really in love with the understanding that I could be of service and meeting different people. And so I would ask questions to her about, different things that she was dealing with as an owner. And then I would ask questions to the chef. Her sister was the bartender. Her son was the manager. So it was family owned. So I was just a curious college student, always asking questions. And then one thing, Sarah, is that really made me hook me in is that, man, we used to make like $500 to $1,000 a night in tips.
Nice. Yeah.
So you got to think I'm a college student broke, and I'm going to work broke, and then coming home with $1,000 in cash in my pocket. So that just kept me working. But I was just always extremely curious, and then really loved the fact that I could make people's evening and day from my service, right?
Yeah.
So that was where I got bit with the bug.
Yeah. Can I ask what you studied in college?
I studied marketing and education. So I come from a family of educators. Like my mother was a special ed teacher. My stepmother was a counselor. I had 2 or 3 aunts that were principals. And so it was just all around me. And I could just say in my DNA of the understanding the importance of education.
And so when you got out of college, did you get right to work? Did you stay in the industry?
Yeah, I did. I was working during the day as a teacher's aide and working at night in restaurants. And then the school actually I worked at, you could actually ride the bus with the kids. So it was kids who had got kicked out of regular school because of different behavioral issues. And so if you got into the school, they would pick you up wherever you live. And so as a teacher, you could ride the bus with the kids and take them home for extra money. So I had long days. And so I would do that 7 to 5-ish. And then I would go and work in restaurants at night, long days. And so it was a conversation with my father. It was 2 things that happened that were serendipitous in a way. I was kind of thinking about, man, I'm working like 15, 16 hours. And then the classroom that I was in, we were starting to make a huge impact on kids. The reading levels were up. And I just remember having a conversation with the owner one day, and she was like, hey, you need to teach more to the test because the test is where we get our funding. And so that was disappointing. And then my father was having a conversation with him, and he at the same time one day, and he said, you probably can't work long-term 16, 17 hours a day. So you may want to think like which direction you want to go in. So those 2 things are in my head, and these conversations coming, and I just decision to leave the school and go full force into the food industry and the restaurant industry.
Wow. So talk me through, because you went full time into the restaurant industry. Maybe I'm jumping ahead a bit, but you started your own catering company at one point called Yams Catering. Is there anything we should talk about in between before we jump to that?
Yeah, and that was years later. So in between, Sarah, I'm working in front of the house of restaurants. There was a restaurant in Hollywood on Sunset called Dublin's. It was pretty popular, and they opened above Dublin's. So above Dublin's was supposed to be like this lounge area. So the owners, once again, family owned, 2 brothers who were in Hollywood security, started opening a restaurant, and they believed in me, and they promoted me to supervisor and then assistant manager. And so I worked there for a couple of years, and then I moved up to the Bay Area. And when I moved up to the Bay Area, I started working in front of the house in management for a couple of fast casual concepts. And one of them, while I was working there, I got recruited by Starbucks. So you have to think, people probably can't imagine, but so around this time, Starbucks was still relatively small in consideration to what it is now. We're probably like 500 to 1,000 stores, which is big to some, but now they're at 30,000. So I got recruited by Starbucks, never drank coffee, had no desire to drink coffee. My stepmother used to drink Folgers. So, a guy called me, was like, hey, we do these OJEs, on-job experiences. So given your background, why don't you just come and visit a Starbucks? You work a shift. And I got to tell you, Sarah, like the store was downtown San Francisco in the financial district, just the energy of the manager, who's still a mentor to me this day, and we're still close. And then the energy of the people, like it was a time where you knew everybody by name. You was really big on customer service. And so I started working for Starbucks, and that's kind of like, it was like an MBA, because at that time, Starbucks really, and they still do, but if you got to think, to go from 500 to 1,000 stores to 30,000, one of the things that they did really well is the money and the resources they put into developing people. Yeah. So if you came in as a barista and you wanted to be a regional manager one day, they had a clear path to that, but then also people that were in leadership were held accountable to how they grew and developed people. So that's where I learned reiterated the importance of developing your team, making sure that you are of service, servant leadership. Like, who on your team are you looking at to grow? How are you pouring into them to grow? And so I stayed there for a couple of years. And then I started working with Magic Johnson when he started to have his partnership with Starbucks and Fridays. And that was like another MBA, right? So I came back to LA. Okay. And worked as director of operations for him for a number of years and managed those different partnerships. So I've been in Los Angeles since then.
That's amazing. You bring up such an interesting, point, this idea of servant leadership, and, food founders are the majority of our audience, right? Individuals who own food businesses, whether they're cafes or small retail markets or CPG brands, right? Catering companies. And I think looking at your team, not just as, oh, these are the people who are filling this space right now, but as people who can have ownership, right? And who you want to develop. And I just think is a really a nice thing to kind of echo back the importance of that, since you mentioned it.
Absolutely. You've been in this industry for a while, and you've worked in this industry. And I tell people, like, hey, I mean, the fact of the matter is that we don't do anything of significance without the support of other folks, right? Mm-hmm. So I hear this a lot in marketing, and I understand it, where people say I was self-made, and I push back on that, because I understand, like, no one is fully self-made. Obviously, you do the work, and you do the work with excellence, and you put in the time, but along the line, somebody has poured into you some way, whether it's directly or whether they've opened a door for you, or they've suggested you to meet somebody, or they've said something about you in a room that you weren't in. Yep. Like, there is no self-made. So when I see something like a company that has grown to the proportions of a Starbucks, obviously there's been incredibly smart leadership, but the leadership can't do it without the people. Yeah. That's just totally the bottom line. Like, you go into a restaurant and you have all these grandiose plans. You know how it is. You're going for a shift, and then 3 or 4 people don't come in. Everything goes to hell. So, yep.
Oh, yeah. I was not made for, I was a bartender, and I could do that really well. To me, I could understand the efficiency in it. Mm-hmm. It was a one-to-one relationship usually, right? Even if you were making a bunch of drinks for 1 or 2 people, my brain gets that. Serving tables, tried it once, but it's like, this is not for me. There's too much anxiety. The paper flipped around. I didn't remember who was getting what. I think I waited 1 table in 1 shift, and I was like, nope, I'm out. Right. And then I worked in a retail store where the pace and that the fires are never all out. You are always dealing with something, and you seem to be the kind of person, like Chelsea, our podcast producer. She's a Starbucks alum as well, worked her way up from a barista.
Oh, okay, great. Wow.
And you guys just, for at least for a while, thrived in that environment, and just never for me. It takes a special kind of person to succeed.
It takes a special person to recognize that you understood your limitations there too, right?
I mean, Yeah.
I think for me, Mrs. Kavanaugh, back to trumpets, like she told me when I was like 18 at that age, 18, 19, she said, you could do this because you have an even keeled personality. You don't go too off the rails. You don't, you're not too, you're not slow, but, and you handle stress pretty well. So she used to say that to me, and that is my personality. Like I can, I always look at it as a leader, like people follow your energy. So if your energy is panic mode, then people will follow along with that. So like you said, like you just identified, like with a restaurant or retail business, you have to be solution oriented because there's all kind of different issues that come at you every second of the day. Obviously, you can have a plan in place, but then you have to be flexible. Some people don't do well with with that uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
I thrived in that uncertainty.
That's awesome. So you worked for Magic Johnson's organization for a while. Where did you go after that? I know there were a couple other steps.
Yeah.
Afterwards.
The whole time I'm there, Sarah, I'm thinking I want to have my own restaurant. I want to have my own restaurant one day. And this is the perfect environment to really learn alongside, someone is magical as him. And then my direct boss was an executor. Both of them were visionaries. So the balance of those two, Magic has been extremely successful. Obviously, he just made the billionaires list. And he is a perfectionist and also understands how to work a room in a genuine manner and make people feel valued. That is something that a lot of people can't do. Ken, who was the president of the Johnson Development Corporation, which was the arm that had the partnerships, he was disciplined and he understood the execution piece. Like you can have great ideas, but if you're not disciplined on executing the plan, which a lot of us, end up doing, the things fall off the radar. So, but at all times, so I can learn from these folks, obviously. And then I said, hey, I wanted to open my own restaurant, which was going to be called Yams. And so I took a leap of faith and left. And then the economy fell through. That was the Great Recession. And a lot of the people that were interested or saying that they wanted to invest stopped taking my calls. They were like, Bryce, who? They send him the voicemail. Like, this is, we're tired. We don't know what he's talking about a restaurant. Like, yeah. So one of my mentors said, hey, why don't you open a catering company? That way you can test out the model, learn a lot more. And I said, hey, I'm one of those people, like my mother used to tell me, it's like, sometimes you got to jump in the water. Yeah. Sometimes I'll jump in the water and take action. I'll have a plan, but it won't be fully flushed. But I think that you can learn a lot by, doing. Yeah. So I did that and definitely learned a lot. And that's how Yams Catering came about. It was going to be Yams, the restaurant, and then we had to pivot and then open a catering company. And I have to tell you, like, being an entrepreneur, I know that the last couple of years after COVID or during COVID, a lot of people talked about, I want to be an entrepreneur. But as you know, creating your podcast, like, it's not for the faint of heart. It's not. You talk about the sexy stuff, but there's a lot that happens.
Yeah. And and I don't know how much you know about our work, but the other side of the business is my consulting, and that's one-on-one financial consulting for businesses in the good food space. And so, it's a lot, right? It's a lot to figure out what do you want to create in the world, right? And so, like, what is the mission and how will it look, and what are you passionate about, right? And then how will you serve people, and how does all of that align? And then I think, without going too deep into it, that personal development that you have to do to continue to stay, I think, on course with what you set out to do, right? And to have that consistency and discipline to work the plan. That's, a job in and of itself, is, to stay confident and moving forward and all of that.
Oh, without a doubt. It's one of the most thrilling and challenging things that I ever did. And I look back to those moments, like I was telling somebody, and I know we're going to talk about this later, is like when I was at every table, I was telling some of the people that I was working to develop, I was saying like, man, when I had my own catering company, I said, do you know, like one day, I would reach cold call like 20 to 30 businesses a day. Then I would narrow those who called back. I would go down to meet those 5 and I would pitch my business. I would set a goal every day of the week. And I was the one that was going down there. I was talking to people, researching, talking to people, pitching to people, making the food for them to taste. Yeah. And most of what I got was no's, but I was just so hell bent on, the mission and the vision that I learned that, no, okay, so what? You just keep moving.
Yeah.
Like that's what you're going to get. And that's the fortitude and the mental fortitude that you have to have as an entrepreneur. And then, you have those dark days where you say, well, why the hell am I doing this? Mm-hmm. And then you realize that that's just a moment sometimes. And then you get out of those moments and then you keep pushing, but definitely learned a lot and grew a lot during that time.
So you had started out of college teaching. You returned to that in a way when you started to teach kids about healthy eating and cooking and stuff. How did that come about? And did you do that as on a volunteer level at one point, or tell us a little bit about that? Because we share that. I volunteered for No Kid Hungry.
Yeah, no kids.
That was my I was sort of like, okay, I'm in this other industry and I really want to get into the food industry. How do I do it? And I was like, well, I'll volunteer. I'll meet people, and make hopefully a little bit of an impact on the way. So how did you get involved with teaching kids about cooking and eating?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the volunteer piece because that's an important thing. And that's how I got involved in it. And then also the other thing that I want to highlight is, and I always talk about this, the power of relationships and the importance of building relationships, not to get something, but understanding how the universe works, right? Reciprocity, how you do things and things come back to you. They may not come back to you at that moment. So that's how that situation played out, is that one of my clients I was catering for was the Urban League in Los Angeles. And it was a breakfast. They used to have this breakfast like every month. And it was all the way on the other side. So I'm in San Fernando Valley, but it was in LA. And I would go and usually drop the food off and then come back, take my daughter to school, and then, work on other parts of the business. And then a lot of time the client told me, you should stay because there's other people in the collaborative that may need your services. And so one time I stayed and I was able to meet somebody from American Heart Association. They said, hey, we'd love to hire you for a couple of healthy catering jobs. So I did that. And one of those jobs after that, they said, hey, we're going to do a cooking demo for seniors to talk about, how to cook fresh meals for a date night for seniors and how to prevent heart disease. So I organized that, found a place. And when I did that, a lady who turned out to be my boss later on, she was there. And afterwards, she said, hey, I really enjoyed the demo. I enjoyed your energy. Have you ever worked with kids? And I was like, I have in a teaching capacity, but never like involving food. And she said, well, American Heart has these garden programs called teaching gardens, where we're putting gardens in elementary schools to teach kids, how to grow food, where fresh food comes from, but also to help prevent heart disease and childhood obesity. Oftentimes the families and the kids are extremely excited at harvest time. But then for example, it's an eggplant. People are like, okay, great. It looks great. What the hell do we do with this eggplant? So she's like, would you be willing to volunteer and do some demos? So Sarah did a couple of those, and it was so much fun. It was elementary kids. I think it was first or second graders, and just their energy and excitement alone just makes your day, right? They're just excited. That's the age where most kids are just excited about everything. Yep. So they're like, I want to try it. All these things. So I was like, afterwards, I started thinking, I was like, man, this should be like your sister program. So if you have a teaching program, a garden program, then you should have a cooking program. Yeah. She said, hold that thought. We're thinking about a few things. And then about a year later, they received a significant amount of funding. They were thinking about doing a community kitchen, but they decided that they could have more impact if the kitchen was going to different schools as opposed to being in one location. Yeah. And so they hired me as the first chef to lead this program in LA. So 90% of my job was working with kids from 8 to 18, and the other 10% was working with some of the donors and corporations that we had going in doing healthy cooking demos for adults.
Yeah.
Amazing experience. I would just have to say, like, the most impactful work that I've done. And also I learned so much about things that I had one perspective on, but actually being in the community, working with kids, being in, underserved neighborhoods, understanding all the different obstacles that people face, being able to eat healthy and live healthy helped me round out my thought process and learn a lot more so I could be even more impactful in my career.
And you were with the American Heart Association for several years.
Yeah,
right?
almost about 6 years, 6 or
Yeah.
7 years. Volunteering about a year and then an employee for 6 years.
Is that when you decided to move to Every Table?
Yeah, going back to what I was saying,
Yeah.
I want to reiterate this with the audience about relationships. So at that time when I'm American Heart Association, Sam, the founder, co-founder, and current president of Every Table, had started a nonprofit called Feast, where he was working with adults, helping them lead a healthier lifestyle, doing cooking classes, educational classes in the same neighborhoods I was. Somebody sent me a white paper at one of the schools and said, hey, this guy is he wants to launch this program in a bungalow at our class. You're a chef, you're in the culinary world, just want to get your take on it. I looked at it immediately and said, yes, definitely need it. Tell Sam if he ever needs somebody to come and talk to participants, would love to help. Once he got set up, he called me on that offer, led a couple classes, learned a lot, built a relationship with him. And so years later, when he started Every Table, I just like, hey, congratulations. I'd always been saying that there's a huge market and there's a niche. Nobody has done healthy food, affordable healthy food. And so glad you're doing it. If you need anything, let me know. And so we just continue to watch each other's careers and be advocate for each other's careers. And then early 2020, a little bit after the pandemic, when a lot of the programs, most all the programs that I was working on at the AHA got shut down because they were in person, right? And so he reached out and was like, what are you doing? Well, at the moment, I'm sitting on the couch like this. No, not at the moment. Like, what's your next step? Hey, I mean, I'm here. It's like, hey, well, I've had this social equity franchise program concept on paper where we are investing in underrepresented entrepreneurs, giving them the opportunity to own Every Table store without any net worth or out-of-pocket money on paper. And we really want to codify it and bring it to life, given your background in nonprofit space, and then also working with franchises and joint ventures. This may be a great role for you. And so we talked for a few months. And then in September of 2020, I joined Every Table as the executive director of the Social Equity Franchise Program.
So can you tell me, and I think especially for folks who maybe aren't LA based, not everyone knows what Every Table does.
Yeah.
Can you describe what they're doing?
Yeah, pretty unique, transformative model. So they are making fresh food. I mean, the food is made fresh every day in a 60,000 square foot commissary outside of downtown LA. So just think of, I come from Michigan originally. So what I always go to, most of my people worked for Ford or GM. So you think about a plant, but just think about food being made at, fresh, massive roasters, massive pots to cook and heat things in, but it's fresh every day. Packaging that food, they have their own distribution. So because of all the savings and everything done in-house, they're able to make a bill at an average of $3.30, and then selling those meals at retail stores and then also through subscription between $6 to $9 or $6 to $10 maybe now per meal. So the mission of it was to provide healthy food and make it accessible and affordable to all. Understanding that in a lot of communities, they're based in LA and then they also have stores in New York, but a lot of cities across this country, one of the issues for people eating healthy is that the fact that it's outside of their pocketbook. So understanding that and creating a solution to that. And then these are chef prepared meals, meaning that there's a whole culinary team that's constantly working every day, creating these recipes and meals with in mind that it has to be at a certain price point. So you're talking about fresh salads, hot meals, fresh juices, breakfast bowls, all these things. So yeah, and started with one store in South LA right near USC. And now I think they have about 60 to 65 between New York and LA.
And so the idea, and I'm sort of saying it back to you to make sure I understand it properly. So every table is making these fresh meals, and they're wanting to reach certain communities with this food. And you called it the social equity franchising, is a way to facilitate that, in that individuals in communities that we want to get the food to can actually have ownership of the location where this food would be made available to the community. Is that right?
Exactly. The only thing that I would amend is that they found out a couple years in that the opportunity was not just in lower income neighborhoods, it was also in medium and high income neighborhoods. If you think about the value that they present at that price point. So obviously in more affluent neighborhoods, you can find healthier food, but you're not going to find healthier food at $6 to $9, right? So yeah, that's what they found out. And then the franchising piece was, being a social enterprise, and the work that Sam did, with Feast and being in those communities alongside, me being there, finding out that, oh, okay, the root of food insecurity is economic insecurity, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the large piece of it is that if you can raise a person's income, when you can create a pathway for people to become economically mobile and then hopefully create generational wealth, then you get at the issue of food insecurity. Food insecurity is just the outcome of all these other societal issues that impact that. So that's where the franchising piece came in. Like, how can we provide ownership opportunities for individuals that work with every table, have been inside of every table and putting and committing to every table, want to be entrepreneurs, may have had dreams to be entrepreneurs, didn't have access to the capital or the network and resources. How can we create an easier pathway for them to do that in hopes that they can create generational wealth for themselves and their families? And so it's pretty unique model and great, unique and transformative vision. All of the money, so every table is a for-profit. I want to make sure I point that out. It is a for-profit, but it's a social enterprise, public benefit corporation, meaning that within its charters, they said that they have to have they're serving a public benefit. Their public benefit is healthy food at affordable prices, also the social equity franchise program. So because of that identification, Sarah, we were able to fund the franchise program through philanthropic dollars.
Wow.
So pretty unique.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what you specifically were doing in your role?
Yeah, in the beginning, I was wearing a number of different hats. So in the beginning, it was like we're crafting something that hasn't been done together. So for example, I helped create the curriculum for the entrepreneurs who made it into the program, that training so we had everything from communication classes to marketing classes that we created. We also helped recruit. In the beginning, we're recruiting publicly and internally. But before I left, we started just focus on folks that were already with every table for a couple of years. And then they go through a vetting process to get into the franchise program. Raising capital, continuing to raise capital. In the beginning, that was probably like 30% of my job. And then towards the latter part, it became 80 to 90%. So really focus on identifying foundations, individuals that really cared about, either healthy food access, economic opportunity, and vetting those folks to fund the program. So those are the role, and then PR too. So really telling the story, as you understand, the narrative is a big piece when you're a company, but an entrepreneur, especially when you're doing something new, like creating awareness about it, making people care. If people care, then they want to take action. So those were all the hats that I wore through my process. And the last, which was really fulfilling, was the folks that were in the program for at least a year or so. The first year we were having one-on-one mentorship conversations, at least 30 minutes, 45 minutes a week. So really unpacking, not only figuring out and identifying the skills that they needed to work on technically, but also unpacking a lot of the imposter syndrome that people have. Particularly, all of us have it in some way, shape, or form. But when you come from backgrounds where things like this don't happen for you, you start to that starts to play in your subconscious, and you start to think that way.
Yeah.
And so you start to think like, I can't even really, I'm not good at math. So I will never, I mean, you're a CFO podcast. So you, as like, some people are just so afraid of math that they constantly been telling themselves that they can never get better. So we have to like unpack that. And so a part of our conversations was like, no, you need to wake up in the morning. You need to tell yourself 10 things that you're good at and that you thrive at. And you need to start replacing that negative talk. So those were all the different hats that I wore when I was in that position.
Have the franchises been successful? Do they?
They're gonna actually, the first franchisees, the ones that I helped recruit, they will be taking over their stores in January of next year. So we will see.
That's awesome.
But the hope is, I mean, my vision is that it will be successful, and that, you know, they'll bring in more and more people, and create a cycle of economic mobility and wealth, and just grow people overall. Like, give people the opportunities to grow, right? Even if it isn't successful, like the journey, as you know, the journey is one of the things that people miss out on. Like, all the things that you thought you couldn't do and you do, even if it doesn't lead to the ultimate goal, like those things are so important as well. I mean, you and I talked about my catering company, like all the things that I had to do. Like my mother used to also say, get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like understanding, like, yes, like understanding, like, okay, I'm uncomfortable right now, but that's okay because I'm growing and I don't need to be perfect at now. But let me, 6 months from now, I will no longer be uncomfortable because I put in the work and the hours doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I'm super interested in diving into, you know, your work at Every Table, your experience in a variety of different communities, and also your experience in entrepreneurship, it gives you a unique viewpoint, I think, of the financial need, right? And ability to fund entrepreneurial ventures. And I know one of the things you talk about quite a bit is the pitfalls of traditional banks and how sort of different ways to go about funding, if you will, in a way that has social impact. And I'll share this too. The majority of our listeners are women of color, and many of them come from not affluent backgrounds, right?
Yeah.
And they're the entrepreneurs who are in what we call the good food space, right? They're trying to do things like bring good ingredients to people's tables, right? We're trying to get their products into more grocery stores or farmers markets or whatever their vision is. And a big part of it too is to get representation of their culture into the community, right? And more widely available. So I think that this topic of alternative sources of funding and different ways to think about this is so crucially important. I'm just like really excited to learn from you here.
Yeah, and kudos for you with what you're doing. And I learned really early that women rule the world, right? So, hey, all the women around me were leaders and trailblazers. Like my Aunt Bessie was like one of the first foreman supervisors at Ford Motor Company. So, so all I saw was women that were running not only households but running businesses outside. So I never had that. What would it call, like obstacle in my mind that women, you know, aren't trailblazers. I mean, so one of the things that I learned at Every Table is, and the reason why I was like telling you, like part of my role, and then the last part of my role was a big part of raising capital, is that raising money is hard, period, right? Maybe a little bit easier for some. Obviously, we know that some people have more resources and network, but just the act of trying to get capital and the act of getting capital within the food and retail space is difficult because of the margins. And traditional banks don't really love food and retail because of that, unless you're already established. So that's an extremely difficult and arduous process to even get anything from a bank. And then you top that on with, like you said, you're trying to change the food system and provide good food, healthier food. That's a whole nother challenge, right? So, but what I learned is that being out on the road and learning about philanthropic dollars and impact investing dollars, just all these different people that are out in the space that are working towards some of the goals that you are and your audience is is that it's out there, and a lot of it may have to come from and has to come from the foundation and philanthropic world, and it could be a combination of that. So that's what we were able to do successfully at Every Table, is really tap into that. And I will tell you, and I will tell your audience, not to say it at the very least at all that it's easy.
Right.
So I tell people that you have to be disciplined, and you also have to be committed, and you also have to understand and not care about people telling you no, because most of the time that's what you're going to get. So, for example, how does that play out? It was one point in time when we were full force into fundraising, or I was researching every day, trying to get at least 10 to 20 people in the pipeline that may be interested, then reaching out to those 10 to 20 on a consistent basis. And then from those 10 to 20, you may get 2 or 3 that are interested. And then you start to pitch to those 2 or 3, and then trying to get money from those 2 or 3. So there's a whole cycle time that it takes.
Yeah.
But you have to be disciplined, you have to be committed, and you have to understand that most of what you're going to get is no. So there's that money out there, but then there's also what you talked about is in the notes and the research is a community development financial institution enacted in the 90s that the banking industry has systemically left out a lot of people, particularly Black people, throughout the years, and been in racist practices. And so CDFIs were brought in to fulfill that gap in understanding and investing in underserved neighborhoods and low to moderate neighborhoods, but also small businesses. And their underwriting process is a lot more lenient than traditional banks, because their purpose is to invest in Black and brown entrepreneurs within these communities that are trying to open businesses. So they understand that somebody may not have hundreds and thousands of money in the bank. Every CDFI has their different underwriting process, but their process is a lot more culturally competent. And so there's thousands of them out there. So me traveling and going to conferences, I found out, about an organization, for example, that rates all the CDFIs throughout the country. And then they have a platform where you can go on and you can put in agriculture, and then it will tell you which CDFIs invest in agriculture, women economics. It'll tell you that. So this is the, and I want to highlight this too. This is the importance. There's a gap in information that still exists too. So this is also the role that my new company plays as well, because I started to notice that, or I knew that, but I started to be even more pronounced, throughout the last years. And I wanted to be that conduit and that resource to help folks be able to get it, because I know that being an entrepreneur in a startup is extremely difficult, and you can have a great idea and you can also be bringing in revenue, but a lot of folks run out of money.
Yeah.
Right. I think I was reading a couple of years ago, like how Uber was in the red for years. It's like a lot of these companies, but they got revenue coming in, and they're also able to get cash to help them maintain.
Yeah.
So my fight and my love is always with the underdog and the underrepresented and that entrepreneurial audience. So, those are some of the things that, I want to share, but definitely want to highlight the fact that if you think it's easy and you get defeated easily, then you're not going to be successful.
Yeah.
For me, when I started my catering company, I went to family and friends. So I was blessed. My father was able to give me a small amount of money, which was big for him and big for me. But pretty quickly, I went through that money. And so I understood, I actually tried to and met with a lot of banks back then, not really understanding and knowing about CDFIs. And all of them said no.
Yeah.
And I understood that was probably going to be the answer, but I still moved forward. So you have to be unique in the way in which you look at funding your business. And then there are people out here that are funding good food businesses, right? There are. So those are some of the people that I met when I was at conferences as well, that want to fund, that care about food. There's not enough out there that I would like to see. There's a lot of folks who are investing in, for example, the just eggs and the plant-based meats and things of that nature, but there aren't a lot of folks that are investing in just the, mom and pop good food ideas that we need to change the food system.
Can you share the website where people can go to do that CDFI research.
Yeah,
I think that's such a valuable.
it's spelled ARIS, AERIS, Insights, INSIGHT. So Arius Insights.
Can we dig into that a little bit more? When you work with the CDFI, is there more requirements to get approved, less? Can you talk a little bit about the process at all, or maybe what people might expect?
Yeah, it's a variation, Sarah. It depends on a lot of CDFIs, they put together their own underwriting process. So it runs the gamut. Like you can have some that I find that are similar. I'm like, oh, well, it's not even, a
Right, you're
big
a
difference
bank.
between you and a bank,
Yeah.
right? You want collateral, you want the high credit score, you want all this, but then there's some who say, you know what, we don't need any collateral. It just depends on their standards and also where they're getting their money from. Most of them get their money from, they get them from the treasury, they get it from foundations, they can get it from individuals. So they typically set their own underwriting criteria, but then like you can have some that are, a lot lenient, or they may say, you know what, because of our leniency, we're only going to loan, up to $100,000. Like we're doing those type of loans.
Philanthropic strategies. As you pointed out, every table is a for-profit organization, but philanthropic funding was received and utilized to further, that the franchising program or to establish it and whatnot. I don't think most people realize that if you are for profit, you can also work with philanthropic organizations. Can you speak to that a little bit, and how
Yeah.
someone might think about, like, who do I approach, and what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like I didn't know that until I started to work with Every Table. There is a vehicle that foundations, not all of them, but a lot of them have at their disposal called PRI, which stands for Program Related Investment.
Mm.
If your audience goes to YouTube, there's a great short video. It's only 2 minutes that the Ford Foundation does on PRIs and also MRIs, which is mission related investments. So those are vehicles that they have at their disposal to make investments through their endowment, right? And PRI is exactly that. It's a program related investment, meaning that a foundation can invest in a for-profit that meets, it's an alignment with what they want to do mission wise, that foundation. So for example, a foundation may say, hey, we really want to solve the affordable housing crisis, which is a lot where PRI money goes to. They can make an investment in somebody who's doing that and then hope to get some returns, as opposed to a grant, where a grant is a complete write-off, right? So they can hope to get a return, or their focus is to get a return, but tax code wise, it can't be over a certain amount. I don't know the specific amount. And that loan, they can be 0% interest, or as high, I don't think the highest they can go is 2%. So it's really cheap capital.
Wow.
What you have to prove, reason why you have to prove, is that you have to have a pro forma or the month, set estimates to say, here's how we're going to pay that back.
Yeah.
As the company that's getting it, right?
Yeah.
So that's why Every Table was able to tap into it. We have obviously retail stores and other stores. And so we created, our financial team created a model that said, here, from this money, this is how we will pay that back. The terms can be 7 to 10 years. So it's flexible in that regard as well. And so that's something, like you said, I didn't know about until I came to Every Table. And so we were able to tap into that. We started looking at foundations who cared about, who were trying to solve healthy food access, that were trying to solve economic opportunities and racial wealth, and the racial wealth gap for women and people of color. And really do your research on that. And then we started to reach out to those. We put together pitch decks that fit that audience. We put together one sheets. We did all kinds of stuff. Like, this is the thing that I was saying, like, to your audience earlier, like we really spent, in discipline on spending time, and most of what we got, like, if was, like I said, no's, but those couple of yeses led to other yeses. And then the philanthropic world looks at it, and the way they identify it is also as catalytic capital, meaning that when you are able to receive, they want to make those investments in those big ideas around the food system, good food, because they understand that if they are investing it, that can draw other investors in it. So they're really giving you that capital to prove out the model, to say that they're invested in it, and then hopefully you bring other folks. And I saw how that played out too. Like, once people, some of the bigger foundations, the name foundations, every world is small, right?
Mm-hmm.
So once they started to find out that, oh, such and such invested in that, that helped it, that fear or that validation that someone else did it, so maybe we should make an investment as well. Yeah. So that's how that played out also.
I had no idea that this existed. I'm so glad that you're sharing this, because I'm sitting here thinking about just the clients I work with one-on-one, not even the broader community, that, they're creating a good food product. They're hiring people from a certain community, like a community. I want to word this right. They're hiring people of all abilities.
Yes.
Right. And that is such a mission-driven way to hire, but it comes with its limitations.
Yeah.
Right. And it comes with its own struggles when you're trying to compete in a food industry, for example, where efficiency and driving down cost so that you can drive up margin, right? Those things, they sort of butt up against one another.
There's always that tension. Yeah.
And so this idea that there may be funding out there from a missions aligned organization, right? Or a philanthropic organization who's also fighting for people of all abilities to have meaningful work and to get paid for it, right? So that they can live independently or have the money to live a good life. That just is such an awesome possibility. And that's just one that kind of is on top of my head.
Yeah, exactly. I'm happy to share it. A big part of, like you said, what you and I do is, sharing information and lessening that information and that financial gap. Like, that's just which I love to do. And I always tell folks, so many people have done it for me. Like, hey, that's what I should be doing. But there's a lot of stuff out there. Just like when you're running a business, like you guys, like we talked about earlier, you got so many things that are on your plate and in your head, and there's only so much time in the day that you don't even necessarily have time to research. And so that's the value that you bring, the value that I bring to clients as well. Like, hey, we can be that thought partner. We can be the ones that's doing the research and making the connections for you, because you're tasked with running that business day to day and all the things that come with that. But definitely, like podcasts and information, the beauty of the digital age, the internet, is one of the beauties is that the information is out there and it's accessible, but then you have to find it and then you have to read it, research it. So, but yeah, they're out there. There are people that want to, make the food system a better system. We understand that change takes a long time. So, and they understand that too. So they're making investments that are long-term, sustainable, and saying that, hey, we may not see the fruits of that while we're here, but we're still going to push against it and work towards changing that and making a more inclusive and equitable space for everybody.
Absolutely. So I was reading through your information, and I know that you had a connection to the LA food policy, right?
Yes.
Paula Daniels, when she was, I don't remember her role, but I used to meet with her when I owned my food business.
Yeah, Paula started the LA Food Policy Council.
Man, I didn't realize that she started it.
Yes. Yeah,
So, and then,
she's another visionary, right?
yeah. And then Claire, whose last name is escaping me.
Claire Fox,
Yeah. Like, God, what
Small World.
a, first of all, I think I didn't know Paula all that well, but Claire, oh, I always thought was just like so much smarter than me. I always felt like, dang, this,
Everybody feels like that around Claire. I feel like that around Claire.
oh my goodness, I mean, I think a trailblazer too, right? In the way that she
Yeah,
thinks and the work that she does. And she's at every table now, I believe,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Claire was
Yeah.
one of the reasons why I would Sam, obviously, but then also Claire, she was there in February of 2020. And so she was also a part of the reason why it helped me want to go over there also.
Yeah.
She recruited me to LA Food Policy Council's board
Okay.
when she was leading LA Food Policy Council. So
Yeah.
she's a mentor, trailblazer, just an extremely not only just a unicorn of a person, right? Like
Yeah.
just amazing. I'm still on the board, executive committee, vice chair of LA Food Policy Council, but Claire was the impetus of that. And then she still sits in, she's running another iteration of, she runs the Good Food Purchasing Policy Institute,
Yeah.
which was a branch of LA Food at one point. She branched off and started her own nonprofit with that. But both of those women, like I said, women run stuff. It's just,
Man,
that's just
yeah.
another proof right there.
Yeah, I was always in awe of them, and I've gotten a bit disconnected from both of them just because my work has changed, and also I'm
Mm-hmm.
just in my house all the time working. But the question I wanted to ask you is, you had mentioned the like food carts, the
Yeah,
street food vendors, and the LA Food Policy Council, if I'm remembering correctly, had a big impact on getting, I'm going to word this wrong, like
no problem.
getting them approved, right, to be able to
To
sell.
be legal, yeah,
Yeah,
legalizing
legal.
street
Thank
food
you.
vending.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And one of the things that you mentioned in some of our communications before today was how you can drive policy change from the bottom up with a community first approach. And I kind of wanted to talk about how I had also heard during it was a conference I attended virtually earlier this year. They talked about how policy can change, not just like from a community up approach, but also from a business first approach where entrepreneurs can, you know, show how change is valuable and kind of lead the way on that. I'm
yeah.
I'm just so curious of your experience in community first and your thoughts on kind of business first policy change and any message that you have for people in this space, because what we're trying to do is absolutely change policy long term. And for our piece here at the Good Food CFO, we're also trying to change industry
Mm,
and really push back against the way that big retail
mm.
works, right, and the limitations on the growth for small businesses there. So I think that this topic really aligns with what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, LA Food Policy Council was another space where I was talking about earlier, like getting MBA. So I would really have really kind of like three of them. That's another space that once I started working with the kids, I immediately saw that there were so many other issues that impacted their ability to be healthy. And so that I was just like I was talking about earlier, just curious. And so I wanted to increase my impact. A friend of mine who was doing this work in Michigan, she had met some people in LA. One of them ran was called Community Services Unlimited, which is a healthy food co-op. They do gardening, they do workshops, they own a grocery store in from Vermont in South LA. And so I met with the executive director there. She suggested that I go to a food policy meeting this was way before COVID. I went there, I heard Claire speak. I went up to her afterwards. I said, man, like you said, man, you're so incredible. I want to just learn more from you. And she told me like, oh, so we just started building a relationship. So she was running LA food policy at the time. And I said, I just started to go to networking events, but then she told me about working groups. And so we just stayed in dialogue and conversation. And she would say, come to this meeting, come to this. And then we started to figure out which working group would be the best. So talking about collective, there were different working groups within LA Food Policy Council there, whether you care about seafood, you care about urban agriculture, you care about good food purchasing for institutions, you care about street vendors. There were these working groups that met on their own, right? So there are committees and working groups that meet on their own, and then they work on the issues that they care about. And some of that was, well, there's an issue with street food vending that is not licensed, and so people are in the shadows and they cannot, they cannot be as successful as they need to be. Why is this illegal? And so oftentimes you're in the shadows, scared that you may get shut down. And so this was a space for them to say, okay, so what are the things that need to change? And it was like, well, we need to legalize it. And so they started to push towards that. And then Claire and Paula with her relationships with the city started to help them facilitate those conversations with council members, et cetera, until it was legalized. It took about 10 years. It wasn't quick, wow. But it was from those business owners who said, hey, I'm doing this every day. This is something that needs to change. We want our industry to grow. We don't want to be in the shadows. We're just making food, trying to provide for our families. Why is this illegal? Yeah. And so that's where the power of collective and being in community, which you talked about earlier with others, it can be so powerful in changing and shaping legislation. The other thing that I started to understand, and this is often the issue, is that a lot of times the people that are impacted the most aren't at the table and making decisions and things that impact their lives. So people always, people are making decisions and they're not inclusive of the folks that the decisions will impact. So that's one of the beauties of LA Food Policy Council, because they understand collective impact. And a part of collective impact is that you should be talking to the folks, and the folks that are being most impacted should be having a seat at the table and making and driving those decisions. Yeah. So oftentimes that doesn't happen. The people with the power are the ones that are making the decisions for the people that are being impacted by those decisions without any counsel or cultural competency of what they're going through.
Mm-hmm. So I was sort of delineating, I guess, community-driven policy versus business-driven policy, but it's the same thing now, I realize, because you had business owners who are operating, as you said, in the shadows, and they came together with community. So they were in community with one another, believed could help to drive change. And so it truly is community driven, with that the note of it's only right if the business owners, those being affected, are included in that community to create change that is the kind of change they truly need to see and that they want to see.
Exactly. Yeah. That's one of the success stories. There are others. I also realized, and I tell people this too about policy and legislation, but just social issues, period. Yeah. I've learned this as I've gotten older, and then also in my experience, that people have to understand that, I think the attorney, one of the prosecutors in the Derek Chauvin trial, involving George Floyd, said something that resonates with me to this day. He's like, we got to win, but I've been doing this for 30 years, he said. And oftentimes people want change to roll like a wheel, but it often moves like a boulder.
Right.
And so when you understand that, then you start to also understand that you have to build your stamina, and you have to be disciplined, and you have to understand that, hey, in most cases, it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
So you got to continue to push. You also have to take care of yourself so you can have the stamina to push. Yeah. And you have to stay in the game. And so a lot of times I think some people on the other side of politics they may know that. And that's why they're like, oh, okay, well, they'll eventually fall off. Like they're not going to push for a long period of time. So, but community piece is and was so important in the collective of bringing everybody to the table, particularly those issues that are people that are being impacted by those issues day to day. They need to be leaders and involved in the conversation and crafting those policies and those agendas.
Yeah. So you are no longer employed directly by Every Table. You have launched your own consulting firm.
Yes.
Can you share the name of your business with us and tell us, you've already hinted a little bit at the kind of work that you're doing for folks there, but tell us all about it.
Yeah, it is named Arthur Lee Consulting and Advisory. It's after my late father, Arthur Lee, who passed last August after dealing with years of kidney and heart disease.
Wow.
Rest in peace, Dad. He was a hero of mine and a mentor, and always pushing against status quo, thinking critically. How are you? How are you helping other people? Right? How are you looking at the world as a whole and helping other people? So mine just happens to be, I just happen to be blessed to do it through food. You know, I've been in this space before. It was, if I think back to the work that we did with Magic Johnson, I mean, that was social impact work. Now it's a title to it, but back then, people weren't investing in the neighborhoods that Magic wanted to go into or ended up going into. And so we were the trailblazers and visionaries in that way. And so over the last couple of years, when I was at Every Table, I would get a lot of people that would send emails and say, I think you have this on your website. Like, I have a quick question. Like, I want to learn. So it was getting a lot of that. I didn't have the time. I didn't have the full time to dedicate to it because of all the work that we were doing at Every Table. But it was something that I enjoyed. Like I said, I enjoyed like sharing a resource or helping somebody think in a different way that's going to be helpful for them. And so I started talking to my dad, periodically last year about what I was thinking. I originally was thinking coaching, and then I started thinking about advisory, consulting, and started to do some research there. And then when he passed in August, I was talking to his two of us, me and my younger sister, and God bless her, because her and my brother-in-law took care of my father full time the last 3 years. And so I was talking to her about doing something in his name to remember his legacy, maybe thinking about a scholarship or so. And then I had a good night's sleep, man, one night, and it just came to me in my dream, like, oh, your company should be named after your father. He stood for all the things you want to do, keeping that legacy going on. So
yeah, and I think you've mentioned it several times during our conversation, relationships, community. It's not always about selling your product. It's not always about getting something for yourself. It's about understanding who are you in community with, I think, and sort of lifting one another up. And as you said earlier, reciprocity, right? It will come back to you somehow, helping one another, being connected to the community, and I don't want to say like-minded. I actually don't like that term that much, but like missioned, I guess.
Like mission, I like that.
People, there's just so much value in all the ways in really understanding connection with people. And I think it's in those moments where, at least for me, you can go to my website and you could see the words there that say what our mission is and what we're trying to do. But that's very different than being in conversation with me where my voice starts to get loud and I get really excited and I, can really dig into why we're doing what we're doing. And on the surface, it might look like, oh, we're helping CPG brands be profitable. But that's just sort of that top line. Under the surface, there's a big movement happening that stretches really far. And the more people that know that story, the better, right? Just like the more people that know about CDFIs and the fact that there are, I forget the acronym already, but philanthropic arms that will invest in for-profit businesses. I mean, I guarantee that there are people listening to this podcast that had never heard that before. And the only reason that we're hearing it today is because we are in communication and relationship with one another, right? It's just so cool. I'm just so grateful that you're here and sharing this information.
No, I'm grateful to be here. And you said it so eloquently, like being in community and connecting each other and that frequency that it creates, right? And I mean, I've seen it play out. And another thing I would tell your audience is that when you have a vision, you have to understand that vision is yours. And so I've seen people, for example, Magic, I was there when people said he was crazy about investing in communities of color. And now, I go to those neighborhoods and there's so many other brands that are there. So we were in the forefront. When Sam talked about Every Table and what he wanted to do there, I understood it quickly and was like, hey, I love being a part of folks who have vision and understand that you may be out there on your own for a while, and you're maybe the trailblazer for others to come along, right? And so, but being okay with that, and you don't need everybody to validate it. That's what I always tell people too, like, stop waiting for everybody else to validate what God has put on your heart and what your vision is. Like, go after it, be passionate about it, be in community with people who are in that same frequency, and then just keep going until you get there. And then once you get there, everybody else, they'll be knocking on your door. They knew you could make it. You knew you were going to do it. But in most cases, no. Most people, my father used to always say, and he didn't say this in a bad way, but it was just the reality of human beings. He was just like, most people are followers. So you have to understand that, like, when you're a leader and you're a visionary, like you're doing stuff that people are like, oh, why would you do that? You gotta make sure you keep those people at bay.
Yep.
Last thing I will say is stay intellectually humble. Right? I'm a lifelong learner. I'm always curious about not only obviously the food space, because it's where I've been in, but just outside of that, I'm just curious. And so if you stay curious, you never know where life will lead you. Never think that. A lot of people pigeonhole themselves. They're like, oh, I've only done this. This is the age. Like, we got these computers in our hands. You can learn anything if you really want to learn it, right? Yeah. So I always encourage people to do that as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been such an honor. I have been looking forward to this conversation for weeks, and it did not disappoint. So really, thank you so much for your time and for all of your work.
Most definitely. And thank you for what you're doing. It's trailblazing.
We try, right?
Enjoy it.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Thank you for joining us here today. We'll be back with a brand new episode next week.